You can now support Ghost Maps on Patreon. Simply look for We Are HANTU or click the link in the description. Inspired by an account from Maituo. Ghost Maps, entry 122, Pulau Tekong, Singapore. Another year of Ghost Maps comes to a close, and I find myself wanting to wind down. After all, it's certainly been an eventful 12 months. My third eye opened. I met a multi-generational family of spirits, and I learned about the new responsibilities that came with being a collector who possesses my particular gift. So, to close out 2024, I've decided to keep things simple. I'll speak with just one interviewee for my last 4 stories of the year. But this is not just any interviewee though. We've been sitting at a coffee shop along Paya Lebar for the last 5 minutes. We picked this area specifically because it's fairly secluded, and the odds are that people won't notice us. Or, more specifically, notice him. I won't mention his name. However, if you've lived in Southeast Asia at any point during the last 30 years, I'm sure you know of him. He has appeared on television countless times as both an actor and as a host. Which is why, for the sake of keeping him mostly anonymous, that's just what I'll call him. The host. One of my previous interviewees, a journalist named Veronica, had introduced us. She said that we'd have more than a few things in common. I assumed it was because of a horror series he had hosted a while back. As it turns out, it has more to do with the fact that he has the third eye too. I haven't been as open with it until recently, he says. But these days, I'm quite happy to share all the stories I've heard and experienced, which suits me just fine. Part of my new responsibilities is to get both sides of each story as much as possible. The person telling the story and the ghost involved. Someone else with a third eye and someone who also deals with stories would help make this a whole lot easier for me. If you don't mind, I'd rather keep mine for last, he says, with an oddly knowing grin. I tell him that I don't mind at all. He continues. In that case, I think we can kick this off with a story from a co-star's time in national service, he says, which I take as my cue. I fish out my recorder, switch it on, and ask him to start from the beginning. The host had met Melvin on the set of a drama series that they were both starring in. Melvin had a bit part, but he really hit it off with the host. I think what drew me to him was that he was so down to earth. No airs about him at all, the host says. They ended up having lunch during whatever days they were on set together. It was during one of these lunches when Melvin shared his story with the host. I was a medic during national service, Melvin had told the host, stationed on Pulau Tekong. Part of Melvin's duties as a medic was to do a weekly IV test. This was where all the medics would practice inserting IV lines. The thing that sucked was that we had to practice on each other, Melvin said, with a laugh. While the medics were generally safe, there was nevertheless a bit of blood spilled at their training shed every day. Melvin says that he isn't sure whether this contributed to a certain level of caution around this particular training shed. Either way, our commanders would strongly recommend for everyone to rush past the shed during guard duty, he said. Most of the time, Melvin wasn't particularly worried. Before he had enlisted, his mother had given him a religious amulet to protect him. In the 9 months that he had been on the island, first for basic training and then as a medic, nothing had happened to him. While his fellow national servicemen talked about strange things they saw or felt, he just kept his head down. All I wanted to do was finish my 2 years lah, he had said. And everything probably would have been fine for him had he not left his amulet at home after one particular weekend out. Melvin slept in a bunk with 9 other national servicemen. Each serviceman had a bed and a metallic locker next to it. I usually hang the amulet on the side of the locker to protect me when I sleep, Melvin said. Without the amulet that whole week while he was in camp though, he chose to hang his beret on the locker instead. The urban legend was that the crest on the beret had been blessed by all the major religious leaders in Singapore. Whether that was true or not, a lot of national servicemen felt secure, as long as they had their beret, Melvin included. For the first half of the week, Melvin was still nervous, even though nothing had bothered him. While the beret's crest might have been blessed, he knew that his amulet definitely was. By midweek, though, his nerves began to settle. His work always kept him occupied during the day, after all. And by lights out, he was usually too exhausted to be worried about any lingering spirits. That is, until that Friday night. Before he went to bed, and even as tired as he was, he noticed something odd. The normally noisy crickets were silent for some reason. He didn't think much of it at first, but then at 3 a.m., Melvin woke up to find that he couldn't move. "I know what you're thinking," he had told the host. "Must be nothing more than a sleep paralysis, right?" And while Melvin had initially thought this was the case too, he soon began to feel like this was something more. From where his bed was, he could see outside into the corridor. There wasn't anyone in the corridor that night, but he felt like he was being watched by a dozen set of eyes. He struggled around for 5 minutes, growing more and more anxious with each passing minute. Whatever invisible force held him down, he could practically feel its anger radiating from it. It wasn't a malicious anger, though. And that's all that kept Melvin from panicking. Finally, he could start to move again, slowly at first. And as soon as he was able to sit back up, the first thing he did was reach for his beret, only to find that it wasn't in its usual spot on the side of the locker. "Naturally, I thought it had dropped to the ground," he had said. He leaned over the side of the bed and saw nothing. The beret was not on the floor. He leaned back up, confused at first, and then frightened. There, sitting by his feet on the bed, where he was absolutely certain it wasn't before, was his beret. Melvin scrambled out of the bed and grabbed his cigarettes. He spent the next 3 hours going through his whole pack at the smoking area. And that night, he booked out of camp for the weekend. The first thing he did when he got home, before even saying hi to his parents, was to pack his amulet into his backpack. This incident happened in 2015. The host met Melvin in 2022. In 2023, the host was in Pulau Tekong, filming a lifestyle program for a news channel. While he was there, he asked if he could see the area around Melvin's old bunk. I asked him if he saw the spirits that had troubled Melvin. He doesn't say anything at first. He just gives me the slightest nod. They weren't angry at him, the host says. They're the residents that used to reside on that island long before the military turned it into a camp. According to the host, these spirits were angry because they were confused. All the changes that had happened there since their time, all the noise that had come with it, the host starts to explain. And they just couldn't keep up. So they lashed out every once in a while at some poor unsuspecting young man who just wanted to serve his 2 years. I asked if he did anything to help the spirits. He says that he mentioned it to one of the soldiers who seemed more inclined to believe him. I don't know if they actually did take any steps to appease the spirits, he says, somberly. I certainly hope so. I tell him that I do too, and suggest that maybe we take a break before he shares his next story. He smiles and agrees. This episode of Ghost Maps was inspired by an anecdote shared during Tales from Incredible Tales. Produced by the team behind Ghost Maps, Tales from Incredible Tales is a show that takes a look back on the classic MediaCorp horror series. It features a variety of guests, such as television personality Hafiz Rahman, Nakia Ayub from True Horror Stories POV, actor and influencer Maito, producer and director Daisy Irani, and of course, At, the host for Incredible Tales. You can now watch or listen to seasons 1 and 2 now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, MeWatch, and MeListen. If you want to discover more of Southeast Asia's other side, Subscribe now and follow us on social media. You can also be one of our supporters on Patreon. Look for We Are HANTU or click the links in the description. Ghost Maps is a HANTU production created by Kyle Ong and Wayne Ray, with art direction by Jolene Lim, and recorded on Audio Technica mics.